with us and to welcome a new member this evening. It'd be great if we could go around the room and introduce ourselves. We are on mics that are a little bit sensitive, so if you could just talk right into them. If you turn to the side, it doesn't pick up really well. Again, my name is Steve McDermott, and I'm the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee.
Pat Savory.
Whitney Kahn.
George Smith.
Hey, George, welcome. For the benefit of George as well, who just joined us, and we just did introductions at our first meeting, which was last month, maybe just a brief introduction about ourselves and what's brought us here. And we can just go around the horseshoe again, and we'll keep it informal. George, again, Steve McDermott. I've lived in town since 2018. I'm really excited to be a part of this committee, given the robust nature of the comprehensive plan and the work that that committee did to put together a vision, a community-guided vision for the next 10 years, and helping to support the 19 implementers carry out the 317 strategies across 10 policy areas over the next 10 years. Welcome aboard.
My name is George Smith. I've lived in Winthrop 33 years. I don't know what moved me over the past few months, but I've gotten to the point where I wanted to get more involved, and I set up a meeting with Anthony and asked him, where he thought I could be useful. And we had an exchange about a few items, and particularly about the microphone problem. And I went on and on about that. And he talked to me about this, and he followed up and sent me the comprehensive plan and said, start at page 310 or whatever it was. And I went through the implementation and looked at, all of the strategies and looked at them. And I said, oh my gosh, how is this going to get done? I contracted with state government for a while, and I kind of know how reluctant sometimes people are to do more than they're already doing. So this is going to be a hoot to see how we pull this off.
Welcome. We look forward to having your experience and learning with and working with you.
Whitney Kahn. I've been here for 2 years now, and I believe it was just this year is when I started attending more of the city council meetings, and just starting to see the, inner workings of the city. And so as I learned more, became more invested in it, there's just so much going on all the time. And in the place that I moved from Prescott, Arizona, I worked for city government there as well. So I got to see kind of the inner workings there. So yeah, I was hoping I could help out with this implementation committee because same kind of thing. There's a lot to do, and it would be really nice to see how much of that we could get through.
Again, Pat Savory, longtime resident of Winthrop, 70 years property owner, family property owner. I was a member of the comp plan committee and am deeply in love with this town and want to see things happen and bring some vitality back to Winthrop.
Thanks all. I should, a couple just housekeeping items. I will do my best to speak into the microphone. If you all could help me, I think if we all kindly help each other, that would be greatly appreciated by anybody who watches this in the future. The other thing I will say is, George, we discussed this at our last meeting. We don't have a parliamentarian, and I am not terrific at Robert's rules. I know some of them in the general gist, and we're going to do our best to have a meeting that's held orderly, but we probably won't be following every rule that Robert laid out, and we're going to do our best to make sure that this is a well-operating team. But probably if you have an objection to whether the public comment comes before the seconding or after the voting, we'll have to defer to Robert's rules and get back to that afterwards.
It's funny you should mention that because a long time ago I was a JC when I lived in Michigan, and they had their own little book of Robert's Rules of Order that followed Robert's, and I loved them, and it made so much difference running a meeting that way, and I still do. In fact, that was one of the things I brought up to Anthony when we sat down. I didn't get a sense that when I went to town council meetings that, you know, you need to have a motion and a second before you even begin discussion by Robert's rules. And so anyways, I had just recently bought a book that's got and I'm not going to belabor you with it, but if anybody wants a little training, we can do that on the side maybe or something.
I'll speak for myself only and nobody else. I would appreciate if we're having conversations that are getting robust and we feel ourselves moving as the business gets busier, some support in that would be great. So that we can be orderly, we can have great community and public engagement, and we can have conversations that are predictable or an order of operations that is predictable so that community members and all the members of the committee understand where we are and where we're moving and we're consistent in our operations. So much appreciated for your expertise. The next item on the agenda after welcomes and intros was a conversation about the implementers and timeline, and Pat Savory has agreed to lead, and I don't need to say your last name because it is not here this evening, but I think given your experience on the comprehensive plan committee, the information you shared over email about how those were identified was insightful, and I thought the rest of the committee might benefit from that knowledge.
So those tables were presented to us, and much of it was carried, much of it. Let me back up. The comp plan committee did not author those strategy tables initially. They were initially authored by our partner, KV Cog, Kennebec Valley Council of Governments, who was our partner as part of the development of the plan. And those were presented to us. We added to them, we modified them, but a lot of the content when it came to responsible parties and implementers came as a draft from KV Cog. I'm not saying that that was a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just saying what I'd like to suggest. And let me also suggest that a lot of that may have been a carry forward from the prior plan. So it's prior plan plus KV Cog, and then some minimal input from the committee itself, and evolving. So I would like to suggest that perhaps the implementers, we could review them and make sure we've got them right, because we might not. I think that that's the bottom line is, I think they're up for discussion. Fair? Is that fair?
Yeah, and I want to make sure that when we run these meetings, that it's not always deferring to me as an arbiter of decisioning, and open it up just for discussion. If Whitney or George, if you have any feedback, I'd be happy to share mine after.
So we're just having a discussion now then based on that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, some questions that I had as I looked it over, you know, you had your strategies and then you had your policy and then your strategies and your timeline. And then you had the responsible committees. And like, I don't have a good sense of what this committee's role is or what agency they may have and the one that comes to mind, the one that stood out to me in terms of the plan was the entrance to town from Royal Street. That was one of the things. And so if we wanted a better entrance to town from Royal Street, I just kind of thought of, how would we go about getting that? In terms of our role, in terms of assigning responsibilities. And so I don't have a clue of how we go about our business, really.
That was a shared feeling that we discussed a bit during the first meeting that I think we will be just working through over the course of probably the first 6 months or so, about how do we carry out work. And the next to last item on the agenda tonight is I believe it just indescriptly said approach to our work, but it's really how do we think about our role as a committee. And the way that I think about our role is that it is not necessarily our job to say, we can use that Royal Street example. I'm not a planner. I don't have that type of professional experience, and I don't know that anybody on the committee does, but we do have a town planner within the town. We have a planning board, and we have a downtown revitalization committee, along with a recreation committee, all of whom might have expertise that would be helpful in designing that and working with our partners at the state for offloading from actually connecting two state routes, Main Street and Route 202. So what I see our role is really being a facilitator and connector. And also highlighting, we sent out an email on June 13th asking each of the 19 identified implementers what they've already begun working on, what they'd like to work on, and what they don't see as their role. So first part of the conversation, try my best not to turn my head, tying back to that first part of the conversation of what Pat said of, do we have the right people in each role? That'll obviously take a long time, but if each implementer says, this isn't me, and we shouldn't be working on this, and I'll be happy to share a little bit later about a conversation I had with the Winthrop Public Utilities District. But I see our role as really being a facilitator, a convener, and a connector. And also part of our job is to report out to the town council at the end of each year. So we may, there was a conversation just recently about committee makeup. We might see, is there something in the comprehensive plan that can help guide that process? Or is there anything connected, and we might highlight X, Y, or Z? There was recently a conversation at Monday's town council meeting about an open space plan. And we might in the future decide as a committee that we want to author letters to the town council when there's an item from the comprehensive plan saying the comprehensive plan implementation committee would like to endorse this activity from the perspective that this was recommended by the comprehensive plan. That could be a role we play. I do not see our role as saying, please redesign Royal Street and assigning that work to Mark Arson, our code enforcement officer. So it's a bit of we're a bit removed, but in some ways we can be highlighting, elevating, and amplifying work that's already being done, or connecting work so that an example I use often is if the planning board is looking to identify our growth zones within town, they are not looking at and the Conservation Commission is also looking at places to be preserved as open space. They're in conversation well ahead of their final plans coming out to ensure that we aren't identifying the same plots of land for incompatible uses.
Thank you.
I think the only other thing I want to say about the existing grid is that it's possible that in defining all those implementers, there was a little bit of, and I use this term loosely, of overkill, making sure we hit every possible potential individuals who might want to be involved rather than, and so a couple of our first early responses to that June 13 memo was, this isn't me, and that's not surprising to me at all.
I see part of the next, and I don't see any, sorry, I'm going to step away from the current conversation. I don't see a need for me to have to call on anybody right now. I think we can have a conversation. If the pace starts getting a bit frenetic or their side conversation, I can acknowledge people. We can go to that method, but right now it seems like we're all comfortable having a conversation where I'm not necessarily calling on everybody. Is that acceptable? And
Another question. Another question that I have, and I haven't been, never been associated with a committee like this. Will we do any work outside of these meetings? Like, I don't know, like would we sit down and like go over each of the strategies and, you know, as a small group outside of a major meeting that's recorded, or do we just work here? And I heard in one meeting that people aren't allowed to talk to one another outside of being in the meeting. I
there's,
don't know what the rules are.
that's a great question, and important for me to highlight that it would be great for you to have a conversation with Anthony afterwards for more specifics, but for anybody who watches this later, We are a group of appointed officials, which makes us responsible to the state of Maine's Freedom of Access Act rules and requirements, sometimes called Sunshine Acts or sometimes Freedom of Information Act, FOIA or FOA are the terms thrown around, or not thrown around, but are used colloquially. So anytime a group of 3 of us get together to discuss town business, it must be a publicly posted meeting. If you are at a barbecue and 3 of us are there and we are talking about the New England Patriots, that does not constitute a public meeting that needs to be posted. That is one of the, I will say it is better to be safe than sorry. It is also, I would also want everybody to be mindful of perspectives and optics. And if there's an opportunity for us to be perceived as having a meeting, we should just post it and we can reach out to Anthony, or are you the best person to reach out to Anthony? We can reach out to Anthony and get those meetings posted. There may be a time where we do outside work and we share it via email, and all of our emails that are shared related to this work are again publicly accessible. So at the last meeting, I let everybody know that I've created an email address just for this work. So it is easily accessible. If anybody ever wants those records, I can find them quickly. So those are accessible along with text messages. I don't know if anybody's sending any faxes, but those would also be accessible. So keeping good records. But there might be a time, I imagine when we get closer to sending a report to the town council, we might want to do some work outside of this meeting and have a work session instead.
I could be wrong on this, but some of the work that that I feel like could be done outside of the meeting would be, so following a meeting, like, for instance, the last one where he had sent out an email to the different implementers. And then as those responses come back, one thing that I noticed that was actually Anthony's response in it. I feel like maybe each on our own terms, as we have time, could go through that and just make note of which areas we may need to bring up at the meeting for, oh, maybe we should remove this implementer from this specific task, or maybe we should connect these two, and just like you had said before, kind of facilitate those conversations or connections, just to get things moving, more smoothly or in a direction that fits with the plan. That's what I've identified so far as kind of what we could do outside of the meetings. Although I do see room for that workload to grow too, I'm sure, depending on what's, coming up for city council meetings or different projects around town.
So George, as an example, the conversation we're having about those grids and the implementers that are currently defined came out of the responses we were getting in email from some of the implementers. And I put out an email to this team, and Steve said, let's discuss this at our next meeting. And that's what we're doing. And that gets me to raise the question, is it appropriate for us as a committee to go back through those implementers and do a review?
Part of my hope in the email that we sent out asking the implementers those series of 3 questions was to also elicit the response of, this isn't something that's appropriate for us. And then rather than updating the comprehensive plan now, we can update the workbook that we've created to work on it to say, here's who's been removed, and we can track that in another worksheet so we can show that later. And if there is an update to the comprehensive plan, we can do that. So I certainly think that's appropriate. I think if on your own time you go through and say, this doesn't look appropriate, let's reach out and have that conversation with, hey, Tim, how are you? Welcome, come on in. To have that conversation with that person because they might have a different perspective, or that committee where they say, this is something we see our role as being secondarily connected to this, but believe we have valuable feedback that could be important. And I'm going to pause for a second. Let me know when you're settled and want to do an introduction. You're good? I'm going to pause for a second and let Tim introduce himself for the recording.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Adams. I am one of the newer members here on the committee and just looking forward to helping out however I can. Um, I've lived in Winthrop for about 3 years now.
Thanks, Tim. Welcome.
Welcome, Tim.
So all of those I think are appropriate. First, removing implementers who say, I don't mean to pick on the cemetery committee, but one of its members drove my son's bus and I really am really fond of Peter. So if the cemetery committee was put down for build a new recreation facility because there might have been a review of old plots of land that haven't been touched in a while, and they say, that'll come up, we don't need to be engaged here until this limited scope, can you remove this from our plate so it doesn't look like we're not doing something? Sure, thank you, happy to. I see no need for us to, I think we can take that feedback really well from the people who know their work and where they're committed to action.
So like the next time we have our meeting here, if this is like an introductory meeting, what kinds of things would we accomplish at these meetings?
So as the work continues and we continue to get an understanding from the implementers, we will begin reviewing the progress towards achieving the goals, strategies, and action steps identified in the comprehensive plan. And the actions we might take as a committee, again, are saying if, we'll use the open space plan because that's going on in real time. If the Conservation Commission comes back and says, we're working on this, we might say, this is what's happening. And you might say from your personal experience, working in, I'm going to make up that you worked with the Department of Marine Resources. You might say, have they considered this? Or we might say, have they connected with the town manager who we heard was thinking about community resilience partnership grants? So our work is really very much tying and weaving together. It's a bit secondary to the actual work of designing the open space plan, but tracking it, keeping it coordinated. And again, we're responsible to report to the town council. So in some levels, it's making it easy for all of the 19 implementers to put together one report that's usable, readable, and I think in some ways a bit distilled as opposed to receiving 19 reports. That could be duplicative.
So is it your sense that these 19 implementers have that plan in front of them and they're sitting down together and saying, all right, here's some action steps we're going to be doing now that we have all these things to do?
George, I'd love to answer that question under the next agenda item. If you can,
Sorry,
this is great because I think a lot of what we're doing is figuring out how we do our work as a committee that isn't charged with find a plot of land and develop 20 housing units. That is much different work than what we're doing here. So these are great questions and all things that I think we're all thinking about. So I think that question you specifically asked there, I'd love to touch on the implementer response.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No need to apologize. I'm asking if
Go ahead. I hadn't appreciated that it was on the agenda.
I'd be happy to move to that agenda item if anybody else, if there are no other questions for Pat on how we got to how the tables are originated, why the format might be the way it is, and I think some of that also might be state requirements.
Yes, a lot of the content of those strategies is indeed state content. It isn't all state content. There's a good healthy portion of it that is Winthrop authored, but there's a lot of state content that are required policy and strategy by the state. So, and the other good news is a healthy portion of those 300 plus are long-term, not long-term, they're ongoing efforts, and that we will simply check those off because they're being done as ongoing by the existence of Public Works or the town administration, or things are happening So we'll be able to sift those out of the 300 and plus and say, being done, being done, being done. So it's not as gloomy as it appears.
I think it's rather optimistic. I'll get better at looking up instead of looking down.
I think the bottom line out of that conversation is that we are open to removing implementers from the spreadsheet as defined by example, the cemetery committee being removed from. Right?
I think the other thing, and I asked if everybody is ready to move on, I'm not. I have one last thing. What isn't identified in the implementers is who should be leading that. And for some of the strategies, there are up to 6 implementers identified with no clear lead. And one of the things I could see as happening is some committees saying, well, look who other people were identified, so we're not going to take the lead right now. And I think that's a role we can play, is asking the question in 6 months, should we actually work to identify lead implementers? Or should we ask committees or staff members why they're not taking action and identify if that's an actual cause? All right. The next item on the agenda was the implementer responses. Some background, there's 19 implementers that I sent an email out to on June 13th asking the questions of, can you let us know if you're already working on something from the comprehensive plan that you're identified as an implementer? Is there some things that you've already achieved? Anthony, I should also mention Anthony Wilson, who's the town manager, is here with us off screen right now. Anthony uses LD1 coming into compliance with LD1 as an example of something that's already been done. So we asked, is there something you're working on? Are there some things you've already achieved? And are there some things you just foresee not being able to work on this year? Of the 19 implementers, we've received responses from 4. It's the summer. Totally understand. And to George, this is why I wanted to answer your question now. Do I think that the plan is something in front of everybody right now? I don't. It's a big plan. It's I think 400 pages with appendices. One of the tools we created was a worksheet for everybody that just identifies by implementer the strategies that they may have been identified on. And we've sent that out to each implementer, a whole workbook that has been shared with you, but also a 1-pager, so it's much easier to work on. So no, I don't think it's in front of everybody. Yes, we are hoping that some of the tools we created might make it easier for staff members and community members who are appointed to boards and committees, might have an easier time referencing it. And I think that's, again, maybe another part of our work is cheerleading the plan a little bit and reminding people that it exists, that in many ways, a community planning process has already been undertaken. So if we have a short turnaround for a grant, we can look back and say, what did the comprehensive plan suggest? We've already received some community input, but we should always be seeking more community engagement and input, but it gives us a way to maybe narrow down where to start. Maybe a less optimistic answer is no, but we'll get there.
And perhaps in light of the fact that it is summer and you only got 4 of 19, perhaps another email in September reminding we're still waiting to hear from you. You know, that's a possibility.
I believe I shared via email with members who weren't appointed to the committee before Monday, so I'll share with everybody now. We received a response from the Conservation Commission indicating that they were meeting on July 7th, which was, the email went out to them after their most recent meeting, but before the next. They want some time to work on that email and get back to us. The Conservation Committee is made up of community volunteers. The Recreation Committee, which is largely just Lonnie Steves right now, noted that it was just the beginning of summer camps and asked if he could have some time, and absolutely. The Winthrop Public Utilities District sent us a letter talking about how the strategies that they have been identified on might be difficult for them to achieve or could be cost prohibitive. They are largely due, the strategies that have identified them as implementers all have to do with the expansion of public infrastructure. And they were really generous in their time. Dan Wells, Larry Merrifield, and Roger Hanson. So the superintendent and two trustees took time out of their days to meet with me to talk about how public utility districts are financed, what goes into that, what is the health and status of our utility district, and really appreciative of them sharing their expertise. But right now, my big takeaway is that we have a aging infrastructure, and expanding would be cost prohibitive to current users. So that's something we would need to consider, or at least share that information with other committees, like the planning board, if they're trying to grow the growth area, or if there's a planned subdivision, wanting to share that information. And then the town manager shared a really robust response with us about the action items that have already been achieved, ones he is working on, ones that are priorities, and ones that he'd like to work on in the future. I believe were the 4 categories. I'd welcome you to come up, Anthony, if you want to share some top highlights, but I would like the chunk of this conversation to be talked about, to be centered around how do we do our work and what is the way we achieve our work when we don't have the authority to say, send this to me now. We are a committee that's been appointed by the town council to help ensure the comprehensive plan is implemented. So how do we work through those? What are the avenues that are open to us?
All right, so I'm really, hold on, let me do a little double duty here. Oh, there I am. So I'm really happy that you guys are willing to serve, because I believe deeply in the comprehensive plan. For those of you who don't know, I live in Belgrade, and I actually serve as the chair of our comprehensive plan committee there. And the reason I wanted to get involved in that group is because I understand and appreciate that it's not really a high profile, sexy gig serving on the comprehensive plan, but it's vitally important for realizing, like Pat said, what do we want our community to be, and what's the vision for our community, and how do we get there? And having served as the town manager in Belgrade, I understand, because I saw it myself from the prior plan, a lot gets done from the plan, but only if there are folks who are holding the implementers accountable in order to ensure, hey, are you working on this, and what strides are you making, and what obstacles are you running into? And so I think that your work is really vital. I will say that I'm disappointed that we didn't have more response to Steve's email, and we're not going to wait until September to get some responses. So now now I have sort of the latitude to say you did not finish your homework. And so we're going to set a new deadline for making sure that people get that done. And again, it's because I think we need to be focused on the plan. And so for those, I sent the town council agenda to all you folks for Monday's meeting. And if you read the item about, as Steve mentioned, applying for a community resilience partnership grant and seeking some funding for some different opportunities, on each one of the options, I went back to the comprehensive plan to look to see if it was mentioned in any sort of way in the comprehensive plan. And I think the open space plan was mentioned like 4 different times among the strategies. And so I think that gives us a lot of impetus towards for pursuing that. So I myself am just going to make sure that we try to keep the plan top of mind as issues come to us, and as we start to bring those to the council to discuss them, so that they remember, oh yeah, this is something the community has already said that they want to see happen in some form or fashion.
Do you want to share the strategies that you're most excited to be working on, or that you've achieved, if you want to get that into the public record?
Well, I was actually really encouraged by, and this is, I think, one of the benefits of going through this exercise. And you know what? If you want, I could share my screen here. If you'll give me just 1 second. There we go. And this takes a little bit of time to connect. So as it's doing that, let's see here. There we go. So what I did on this spreadsheet, the things that are highlighted in light green there are things that we're currently making some progress on it in some form or fashion. And so on those items over to the side where it says status, I tried to explain sort of what's going on right there. So just a good example, that first green highlight you see is explore grant opportunities for economic development. And I said, we have and will continue to apply for grants. And we serve as the fiduciary agent for the utility district for the federal grants that it gets. And so as Steve mentioned, just as sort of a side note, that I think that represents the best opportunity for expansion of our utility district is seeking federal grants earmarks in order to fund those. Because I don't know, did they mention this to you, Steve? I think the Dan Wells once told me like now currently a mile of new sewer costs like $2 million or some such. So it's an astronomical figure. And so you can see sort of what they're up against. And they have a relatively small customer base because not everyone in Winthrop is on the water and sewer system. So you can scroll through these and I just forwarded these this evening to you, George, and to you, Tim. So you'll have a chance to take a look at this, but there's not a, row 18, yes.
I think
Yeah, so to Pat's point, I mean, and I read through this thing a lot of times, when I was going through, I was like, what am I doing on this? So I think that's, now I wouldn't let all the implementers off the hook because they may use that as an easy excuse for not having to be responsible for something. But I do agree with Pat. There are going to obviously be instances in here where we didn't get the implementers quite right. So the blue items are things that are already sort of in the works in some form or fashion. So the first one you see there is update the 2000 downtown revitalization plan. And I highlighted that blue. So the blue highlights are things that I personally view as priorities because I think updating the downtown revitalization plan, as I mentioned in the note right there, is the ground floor for downtown revitalization. And it's also a requirement to have a current downtown revitalization plan if you're going to seek community development block grant funding, which is a vital source for downtown revitalization. So the blue ones were highlights among my priorities. Among those, and this, I mean, obviously housing is a great need in our community, but this one right here, just to ensure that our ordinances are encouraging the development of affordable housing, including rental housing. I think that's, and the only note I made with that is anything we can do to promote and support housing, we should definitely do. Scrolling through this. And a lot of this is housing, and it's sort of the same note. Anything we can do to promote that, we should be working toward. Here's something right here. I also just made some notes as I was going through this, just things that occurred to me as I was reading through this. And I went through this several times because I thought it was helpful. But the strategy is to explore options and encourage the documentation of septic inspections reports to be filed when with the property data at the code enforcement office when there is a title transfer of properties in shoreland districts in conjunction with state law. And that is for sure on the books, and that is required. But in talking with our code enforcement officer, he says there's no real practical way to enforce that. So he's going to be checking with the DEP about how we might be able to meet that strategy. So that's one where I'm listed as an implementer, but it's probably more in the realm of the code enforcement officer. But then the town manager can help to hold the code enforcement officer accountable for following up on that. Yes,
Is that state law that should be occurring?
that is correct. But see, the town doesn't know when a title has been transferred on a land.
True.
Can I ask you to just, yeah, thank you.
I mean, how do we know that we have a big need for housing? How do we know that? Census data? How do we know that?
It's well documented in the plan.
Yeah.
The plan itself does document all of the stats about our population, our housing, available housing. It's got a ton of information, George.
And luckily, we have at our resource a housing expert here, along with Pat Ladd, and Pat Ladd is a local realtor, and she would tell you that it's almost impossible to find rental housing, for instance, in Winthrop. There's just no stock available, and a lot of the stock that we have are really large homes for a day and age when people might have had 6 or more kids, which isn't really the current culture. And so there's also a dearth of housing stock that just can serve either seniors who want to, retire in place, remain in the community, but maybe, their house is now too big for them, or young couples or families, or young professionals who are singles. And so one of the things that I think the terms that Steve taught me was right-sized housing. And I think that's what we're looking for more of in the community, is different types of housing that can serve the whole of our population.
George, can I ask a follow-up question? Are you asking broadly about how the strategies were identified, whether they were supported by quantifiable or qualitative or quantitative data, or specifically just to that housing item?
No, it wasn't, because and as soon as you mentioned that it's in the plan, I didn't read the plan page for page, but I do remember looking at all the census data and all that stuff. So my apologies for even asking that question.
I think that's a great question, though, because there are about probably 6,500 other people in town who may not have read the plan. And understanding that the strategies are driven by the information from the plan, and also community engagement sessions that were held, and with input from the town council and town staff on what we should be working on. I think we're really, I don't want to say fortunate, because all of this data, much of the data around housing is driven by a significant housing shortage, somewhere estimated up to 84,000 units, which has led to an increase in study of what is driving that. So beyond the plan, we have a wealth of data, both at the state and county level, that can help us make those information. And there is an item referenced just above that to identify new construction requests. So we can identify what type of housing or commercial developments happening in town, so we can create much more local and Winthrop specific data as well.
Yeah, and we do have software that's capable of doing that. We have not been using it to our fullest potential, but I think we're moving in that direction. So just a couple of other things. So I was just scrolling through this one right here, a strategy to resurrect the annual town report. So last year's annual town report was the first that we've had in 7 years. And funny little side note, when I was preparing to interview for the job and doing my research, I came to Winthrop one day for the specific purpose of getting a town report, because I couldn't find it on the website. And I walked into the clerk's office and I asked for a town report, and they said, "Well, we don't do one." And I thought, Well, that's odd. Isn't it required by state law? And I got this cock and bull story because I knew what the answer was. And as it turns out, the town had not published a town report in 7 years. And I think that's vital in order to let folks know what's going on in the community. So the new town report is actually on the town's website. I'll be happy to send you all a link to that tomorrow morning. And it is at the printers right now, so it will soon be available. So we're back in the habit now of producing town reports. These yellow things are just notes I made on the side. Just things that, as I said, occurred to me as I was going through this. And so, for instance, right here, the strategy is to direct at least 75% of new growth-related capital improvements into designated growth areas. And that was talking about municipal capital improvements. And what I wrote was, I don't anticipate any new facilities on the near horizon. I think if anything, we're probably going to be looking at a consolidation of facilities. I know once upon a time, this community considered it like a public safety campus that would have incorporated police, fire, and ambulance. Personal opinion, I think that's what the community should have done. I think it would have been much more cost-effective and efficient operationally. And so now because we have a police station that's more than 200 years old, and we have a fire station that suffered a lot of burst water pipes last year, people are starting to really think if we should revisit that. But other than that, and the potential of, maybe having a shared public works garage with our neighbors in Monmouth, but I don't see any of those happening necessarily even within the next 10 years.
Can I give you, I was just going to say, can I give you a 2-minute warning?
Yes.
Just noting that one, that's an ongoing kind of a guideline that you're
Mhm.
watching, and that's all that needs to happen with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll do is these that are highlighted in light orange are things that are no longer applicable. This LD, staying within the LD1 spending limits will, after this plan was done, the legislature repealed LD1, so that's really no longer a factor. And then this one right here, just about contracting for a sheriff's deputy for dedicated part-time coverage. Right now, as many of you know, we're looking at potentially consolidating our police department with Monmouth, and I think that's probably a better approach. Our police chief once worked as in the sheriff's office, and he said it was forever a problem where communities would contract for a deputy, and then something would happen, and the deputy would be over in another jurisdiction serving as backup for someone who had gotten a call in a neighboring town. So it's one of those things that in theory it sounds great, in practice not so much. So if you folks have any questions about anything that I've highlighted in this plan, just as far as strategies that the town manager is responsible for implementing on, I'll do my best to answer those.
Any questions from the floor? Thank you, Anthony. Really appreciate
You
the
bet.
time and effort and context that you put into the work for us.
It was a really good exercise for me, so I actually appreciate the opportunity to do that, and now I'm going to impress upon the other directors that very notion.
Some ideas on. Other videos, mine.
Against the rules to do it, but my thought would be to divide the implementers up among us. And would it be possible to like assign so many to each of us and we'd go visit them? We'll sit in on one of their meetings, maybe go through the list with them. I don't know. But that was my thought.
I think Whitney had a similar suggestion at our first meeting, and the agenda item after this is approach, and we spent some time talking about approach here, but largely what we're talking about when we drive engagement is the approach to our work. I have some concerns about dividing it up by implementer and having committee members be responsible for individual implementers. Not concerns that I couldn't be assuaged of, but I think one of the concerns is one, understanding what our role is, and we do not have authority to say, Anthony, come meet with me and tell me what's going on and make some time for me, and wanting to be mindful of everybody's workload. But if that is the approach that the committee wants to take and we can do that reasonably, open to that idea. I just don't know. I have some questions about how we would do that and how that helps us move most efficiently.
I just remember when I worked for the Department of Education, every year, each school district files for federal funds under several different titles. And at the State House, there was somebody at the State House that was responsible for that particular title. And so they would go out and have an audit with that school district to see how they were doing. And the school district never looked forward to their visits. They always wanted to be left alone, and yet it was integral to the process. And I see us, like, from what I understand tonight, maybe being even one step back removed from that process. So
I was just thinking, maybe we could come up with a sort of a hybrid operation that kind of takes that approach where we have the implementers divided up amongst us, only from the perspective of, I feel like some of this information we might be able to come across in going to town council meetings or just paying close attention to the departments and what they're releasing to the public or publishing. So maybe not in the fashion of, like I had originally said, which was be the lead and the contact and kind of the driving force behind it, but maybe instead like reconnaissance in a way, so that we can, I guess, more deeply look into the different specific departments or organizations that the implementers are working on, so that if I have, 3 or 4 that I'm kind of responsible for, then I might be able to dig up more information than I would at a more surface level if I were looking at all of them, and then be able to, I guess, just put our heads together from the perspective of combining all of that information at each different meeting, if that makes sense. And just a thought, I'm not like hooked on it or anything.
You don't need to justify it or add any just a thoughts. It's a great idea and a great suggestion. I think it makes sense. Let's think of, Whitney, for the next meeting, can you come back with a proposal of what that might look like and how we might divide it? And I think knowing that the town manager is not the same as the Winthrop Public Utilities District in terms of number of recommendations, might avoid that. I think that'd be really helpful for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
My initial thoughts were knowing that hierarchy, thinking about engagement, we sent out the emails, sent it directly with the town council and town manager knowing. My next step is really thinking about sending just a follow-up email to the town manager and to the town council, saying, here's the responses we got back. Here's who it was sent to, here's who responded, here's who we have not heard back. And asking them how they would like to approach this work, given that many of the implementers are town council points committee members. Want to make sure that the committee is open, and that makes sense as a next step. We send out more emails wanting to be most efficient.
Would also help it with any next communication to make sure that the implementers know that they have full right to come back to us and say, that's not me. we need that input from them as well, meaning, and I think Anthony's made it clear to us that it's a healthy exercise to go through their spreadsheets and say, not me, not me, and they can start looking at, I'm already doing this. It will be an incredibly powerful experience if they do it. So give them the rights to come back to us with, I'm really not the right person for this. We get it, because it was, just thrown together in some respects. Anyway, give them, so you don't want to go back to them again and say, haven't heard from you?
I sent a follow-up email.
Did you?
I did.
Oh,
So my thought is to then get the input from the people, the individuals and who are responsible for navigating that, wanting to be mindful, get their feedback of whether the timing request was appropriate. We acknowledged it was a little bit of a short runway and heading right into summer, but just getting their feedback on how to approach. They know the individuals that they work with and have appointed to committees, and get their feedback on how best to approach this.
and maybe make sure that they're focusing on the ongoing and the short term. We know that the long term are the one that are going to cost us the most in resources, be it time or money. Again, an invaluable experience for each one of them to go through their own spreadsheets.
Thank you. I'll take the silence as a okay to proceed as announced.
Mhm.
Lots of nods. I mentioned this earlier, and Tim, I think you may have come in after this. We are still going, for the next probably 6 months, we're going to be talking about how do we do this work and what does it look like? And I think it will really change at various points when there's a lot of action. That will really change how we're connecting and pointing to and reporting out on the work that needs to be done and that we're doing. So I think being open to this process of identifying how the work gets done, and that at different times, the gear or pace at which the work change.
We have to keep reminding ourselves that this is a 10-year plan. It ain't going to happen tomorrow.
The last item on the agenda should have been new business. I will do my best to get agendas out and published like a week or two ahead of time. I want all of you to feel free to send an email to the group or to me asking saying that there's something you'd like on the agenda. But if something happens in between that, like business conversation, all the while being mindful that we've made business. Take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Take a second from somebody.
Second.
We're done. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Our next meeting's on August 14th at 5:30.
Keep ahead of ourselves.